This is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today we have a fifth episode, the reading of this lovely vintage book, The History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth. This is a folio society edition. I'll put links in the description of the other chapters if you want to catch up. Okay, so we are still on this chapter, the coming of the Romans, and we were up to here, so this is where I'll begin. Once he had established absolute peace in every part of the island, Marius began to develop a close relationship with the Roman people, paying willingly the taxes which were demanded of him. Encouraged by the example of his father, he fostered justice and peace, the maintenance of the laws, and decent behaviour in all matters throughout his kingdom. When Marius finally died, his son Coilus took over the government of the kingdom. From his early childhood, this Coilus had been brought up in Rome. He had learned the ways of the Romans and had conceived the greatest possible liking for them. He paid their tribute without even attempting to argue about it, for he realised that the whole world was subject to them, and that their power was greater than that of individual countries or any one province. He therefore paid what was demanded and was left to rule in peace over his possessions. None of the British kings ever held the nobles of their realm in greater honour, for Coilus either left them alone in peace, or else rewarded them with frequent gifts. A single son was born to Coilus. His name was Lucius. When Coilus died and Lucius had been crowned king of the country, the latter imitated all his father's good deeds, with the result that he was considered by everyone to be a second Coilus. His great wish was that he should end in even greater esteem than he had begun, and he therefore sent a letter to Pope Eleutherius to ask that he might be received by him into the Christian faith. Miracles which were being wrought by young Christian missionaries among different peoples had brought a great serenity to Lucius's mind. He was inspired with an eager desire for the true faith. What he asked for in his pious petition was granted to him, for the Holy Father, when he heard of the devotion of Lucius, sent him to learned and religious men, Faganus and Duvianus, who preached the incarnation of the Word of God, and so converted Lucius to Christ and washed him clean in holy baptism. On all sides, the peoples of the local tribes hurried to follow their king's example. Cleansed of their sins by this same baptism, they were made members of the kingdom of God. Once the holy missionaries had put an end to paganism throughout almost the whole island, they dedicated to the one God and his blessed saints the temples which had been founded in honour of a multiplicity of gods, assigning to them various categories Gaius Ambrosius. All this Gildas set out in a treaty which is so lucidly written that it seemed to me unnecessary that it should be described a second time in my more homely style. When this famous King Lucius saw that worship of the true faith had increased within his kingdom, he was very pleased indeed. He turned to better use the goods and the lands which the idolatrous temples had hitherto owned, permitting them to remain in the hands of the churches of the faithful. Feeling that he ought himself to find the money for some mark of distinction that should be greater than this, he rewarded the churches with even larger lands and houses, and increased their power by giving them every possible privilege. In the end, Lucius died in the town of Gloucester, while still occupied with these matters and with other moves which formed part of his plan. In the year 156, after the incarnation of our Lord, he was buried with all honour in the church of the archdiocese. He had no heir to succeed him, so that after his death dissension arose between the Britons, and the power of Rome was weakened. Once the fact of the death of Lucius was known in Rome, the Senate sent Severus as its delegate, and 2 legions with him, to restore the country to Roman domination. The moment Severus landed, he joined battle with the Britons and forced some of them to submit to him. He did all that he could to harass those whom he was unable to conquer, by making terrifying assaults which he thought likely to end their resistance. In the end, he drove them beyond Dera into Albany, where, with Sulgenius as their leader, they resisted with might and main, often inflicting immense slaughter on both the Romans and their own countrymen, for Severus took with him as auxiliaries all the island peoples he could find, and as a result frequently left the field as victor. The emperor was annoyed at this revolt by Sulgenius. He ordered a rampart to be constructed between Dera and Albany to prevent Sulgenius from pressing his attack closer home. Now there's an asterisk there, so let's read this. This is the wall of Hadrian and Severus. Geoffrey is unaware of the existence of the wall of Antonius between the Clyde and the Forth. A tax was levied, and they built their wall from sea to sea. For many years afterwards it held back the attacks of the enemy. When Sulgenius was no longer able to resist Severus, he crossed the sea to Scythia, hoping to be restored to power with the help of the Picts. He collected together all the young men of that country, returned to Britain with a huge fleet, and besieged York. As soon as this was known among the various tribes, the greater part of the Britons deserted Severus and joined Sulgenius. Severus did not let this deter him from his undertaking. He assembled his Romans, and those Britons who were still faithful to him marched off to the siege and fought with Sulgenius. Just at that moment, when the battle which he had brought about was reaching its height, Severus was killed, with many of his men, and Sulgenius was mortally wounded. Severus was later buried in York, which his legions had occupied. Severus left 2 sons, Bassianus and Geta, the latter born to a Roman mother, and Bassianus to a British woman. Once the father was dead, the Romans raised Geta to the kingship, favouring him because as he was Roman on both sides. The Britons refused to accept Geta and chose Bassianus, for he was related to them through his mother's line. The two brothers thereupon fought each other. Geta was killed, and Bassianus seized the kingship. At that time there lived in Britain a certain young man called Carausius. He was born of humble parentage, but he had shown his courage in many battles. He went to Rome and asked permission of the Senate to employ a fleet of ships to defend the coast of Britain against invasion by the barbarians. If this permission were granted him, he promised that his achievements would be so many and so great that in effect he would do more to exalt the state of Rome than if the very kingdom itself of Britain were handed over to Rome. Once he had deluded the Senate with his promises, he obtained what he had asked for and returned to Britain with his commission sealed. Carausius soon collected some ships together, gathered round himself a great force of the young men of the country, and put out to sea. He sailed along all the coasts of the kingdom, making the greatest possible upset among the inhabitants. Then he landed in the neighbouring islands, laid waste to the open fields, sacked the cities and the towns, and plundered those who lived there of all that they had. While he was behaving in this way, all those who lusted after someone else's possessions flocked to join him. In a short time he had so great a force under command that no local leader could resist him. His head became so swollen by what he had done that he instructed the Britons to make him their king, promising that he would massacre the Romans and wipe them out of existence, and so free the whole island from that foreign race. He was given what he asked for. Carausius' next move was to fight with Bassianus, kill him, and take over the government of his kingdom. It was the Picts who betrayed Bassianus, the men whom Duke Sulgenius, his own mother's brother, had introduced into Britain. At the height of the battle, at the very moment when they should have come to the help of Bassianus, corrupted as they were by the promises and bribes of Carausius, they deserted the king and attacked his allies. The other side was thrown into confusion, for they could not tell enemy from ally. They fled from the field of battle, and the victory went to Carausius. Once he had won the day, Carausius gave the Picts a tract of land where they might settle in Albany, and there they remained through the centuries to come, intermarrying more and more with the Britons. As soon as the usurpation of Carausius had been reported in Rome, the Senate sent Allectus as legate with 3 legions to kill the tyrant and to restore the kingdom of Britain to the domination of Rome. Constantius withdrew what remained of the Romans into the city. He closed the gates, garrisoned the towers and the other defence works, and made plans to resist Asclepiodotus, or at least to avoid the death which threatened them. The moment Asclepiodotus realised what had been done, he lost no time in laying siege to the city. He sent word to all the leaders of Britain that he had killed Allectus and many of his soldiers, and that he was now besieging Gallus and the remnants of the Romans inside London. He begged each and every one of them, as a matter of great urgency, to come and help him as quickly as possible, for now that they were besieged, the whole race of Romans might easily be exterminated from Britain, if only, as he said, the British leaders would attack them with their united strength. The Demetae marched in answer to his summons, with the Venedoti, the Dira, the Albani, and all the other Britons, without exception. As soon as they had all assembled, and Duke Asclepiodotus had inspected them, he ordered a great number of siege machines to be constructed so that they could batter down the city walls. Without a moment's delay, each man obeyed him to the limit of his strength and courage, and they made a bitter assault on the city. They quickly tore down the walls, and once they had forced an entrance, they set about killing the Romans. When the Romans saw that they were being slaughtered one after the other, they pursued Gallus to surrender together with his men, and to beg mercy of Asclepiodotus, so that they might be allowed on depart with their lives. Almost all their number had been killed already, leaving one single legion, which was resisting as best it could. Gallus agreed to their request, surrendering himself and his men to Asclepiodotus. Asclepiodotus himself was prepared to have mercy on them, but the Venedoti advanced information, and in one day decapitated the lot of them beside a brook in the city, which, from the name of their leader, was afterwards called Nant Gallum in Welsh, or in Saxon, Gallabrook. Once he had triumphed over the Romans in this way, Asclepiodotus took the crown of the kingdom, and with the assent of the people, placed it on his own head. For the next 10 years he governed the country with true justice and peace, checking the cruelty of robbers and the knife attacks of thieves. It was in the days of Asclepiodotus that the persecution by the Emperor Diocletian began. By this persecution, the Christian faith, which had remained whole and inviolate since the time of King Lucius, was almost entirely obliterated in the island. Maximianus, Herculius, the general commanding the tyrant's armies, came over to Britain. By his orders, all the churches were knocked down, and all copies of the Holy Scriptures which they could discover were burnt in the market squares. The priests this was made known to them, the Senate rejoiced at the death of a king who had caused trouble to the power of Rome in all that he did. Mindful as they were of the setback which they had suffered when they had lost the kingdom, they sent as legate the senator Constantius, a wise and courageous man who had forced Spain to submit to Roman domination and who had laboured more than anyone else to increase the power of the state of Rome. When Coel, king of the Britons, heard of the coming of Constantius, he was afraid to meet him in battle, for the Romans' reputation was such that no king could resist him. The moment Constantius landed on the island, Coel sent his envoys to him to sue for peace, to promise submission, on the understanding that he should retain the kingship of Britain and contribute nothing more to Roman sovereignty than the customary tribute. Constantius agreed to this proposal when it reached him. Coel gave him hostages, and the two signed a treaty of peace. Just 1 month later, Coel developed a most serious illness which killed him within 8 days. After Coel's death, Constantius himself seized the royal crown and married Coel's daughter. Her name was Helena, and her beauty was greater than that of any other young woman in the kingdom. For that matter, no more lovely girl could be discovered anywhere. Her father had no other child to inherit the throne, and he had therefore done all in his power to give Helen the kind of training which would enable her to rule the country more efficiently after his death. After her marriage with Constantius, she had by him a son called Constantine. 11 years passed, and then Constantius himself died at York, and bequeathed his kingdom to his son. Some few years after his elevation to the throne, Constantine began to give evidence of remarkable courage, for he was as fierce as a lion. He maintained justice among his people, moderated the rapacity of footpads, put an end to the oppressive behaviour of local tyrants, and did his utmost to foster peace everywhere. At that time there lived in Rome a certain dictator called Maximianus. His ambition was to disinherit all the nobles and all the most distinguished citizens, and he crushed the state of Rome under the grossest possible tyranny. Those who were driven into exile by his oppressive savagery fled to Constantine in Britain and were received honourably by him. Once a great number of such men had found their way in flight to Constantine, they at last managed to fill him with hatred for the tyrant whom I have mentioned. This by ceaselessly complaining to him in speeches like the following one. How long, Constantine, do you propose to endure this disaster which has forced us into exile? Why do you delay our return to our native land? You are the only one of our race who is powerful enough to expel Maximianus and to give us back what we have lost. What prince can ever be compared with the King of Britain, either for the might of his lusty soldiers or for his treasures of gold and silver? We beg you to march on Rome with your army, taking us with you, and so give us back our possessions and restore our wives and children to us. By these happenings and other similar events, Constantine was encouraged to go to Rome. He captured the city, and then was made overlord of the whole world. He had taken with him 3 of Helen's various regions which he began to ravage. This was duly announced to King Octavius. He reassembled his men in companies, followed Traherne, and fought him in the province called Westmoreland. This time Octavius was defeated and fled. When Traherne realised that victory was his, he pursued Octavius and gave him no respite until he had wrested from him his cities and his crown. Octavius was greatly saddened by the loss of his kingdom. He sailed off to Norway to seek help from King Gunbert. As an interim measure, he ordered his close friends to do their utmost to assassinate Traherne, the leading figure of a certain municipality. A man who cared more for Octavius than any of the others obeyed his commands as soon as he possibly could. One day, when Traherne was on his travels some way away from the city of London, this man lay in ambush with 100 of his own soldiers in a certain valley in the forest through which the king would have to pass. He attacked Traherne unexpectedly as he passed by and killed him in the midst of his soldiers. When Octavius heard this news, he returned to Britain, scattered the Roman forces, and drove them in flight, thus regaining the royal throne. In a short time, he showed such personal bravery and acquired such a vast store of gold and silver that he feared no man. Indeed, he held the kingship of Britain in great content from that moment onwards until the days of Gracianus and Valentinianus. Years later, weakened now by old age, Octavius decided to make provision for his people. He inquired of his councillors which of his family they proposed to raise to the kingship after his death. All he had was a single daughter, for he lacked a son to whom he might bequeath the government of the country. There were some among his councillors who advised that he should give his daughter in marriage, and with her the kingship, to a man chosen from among the Roman nobility. This so that they might with the greater confidence expect to enjoy peace. Others, however, advised that Conanus, Diocletian, the nephew of Octavius, should be declared heir to the throne of the kingdom, that the king's daughter should be married off to some prince from another country with a dowry of gold and silver. While these things were being argued out between them, Carausius, the Duke of Cornwall, arrived and gave it as his opinion that they should invite the senator Maximianus and offer him the hand of the princess, together with the kingship, and so enjoy peace forever. Maximianus was a Briton on his father's side, for he was the son of Helena, the uncle of Constantine, whom I have mentioned before. From his mother and by race he was, however, a Roman, and by birth of royal blood on both sides. This solution therefore promised a lasting peace. Carausius felt that Maximianus had a right to Britain, for he came from both the family of the emperors and from a British region. Conanus, the king's nephew, was annoyed by the advice which the leader of the Cornishmen had given. He strove with all his might and main to seize the kingship, and in trying to achieve his objective, he upset the entire court. Carausius was unwilling to retreat from the position which he had taken up. He sent his son Marius to Rome to explain things to Maximianus. This Marius was handsome in stature and of great personal courage and boldness. seeks nothing better than to find someone to whom he may bequeath his kingdom and his daughter. He has no male heir, and he has asked the advice of his leaders about whom he shall marry his daughter to, and to whom he shall give his kingdom. His warriors have answered his appeal, and he has decided that the girl and the kingship should be offered to you. They have sent me to you, so that I may tell you of this. If you will come with me, then you will be able to carry out this project from its early stages onwards. With the treasure house of gold and silver which exists in Britain, and the hordes of warlike soldiers which lives there, you will be strong enough to return to Rome, drive out the emperors, and capture the city. This is what your relative Constantine did, and many other kings of ours who have risen to be emperors have done the same. Maximianus agreed to what Marius had said. He came to Britain, sacking the cities of the Franks on the way, and thus collecting together a fortune in gold and silver, and rallying soldiers to his banner from all directions. Soon afterwards he put to sea with a following wind, and landed at Southampton. When this was announced to King Octavius, he was completely petrified with fear, for he thought that an enemy army had arrived. He called his nephew Conanus to him, and ordered him to summon all the armed soldiery of the island, and to march out to meet the enemy. Conanus immediately assembled all the young men of the realm, and came to Southampton, where Maximianus had pitched his tents. When he saw the vast company of men arriving, Maximianus was overwhelmed with anxiety, and did not know what to do. He himself was accompanied by fewer troops, and both the numbers and the boldness of the men who had come terrified him, for he could not hope to pacify them. He summoned his older advisers, with Marius himself, then began to inquire what he should do in the circumstance. "It is not for us," answered Marius, "to fight with these lusty warriors. We have not come here with the purpose of conquering Britain by force of arms. We must ask for peace and for permission to camp here until we know what the king intends. Let us say that we have been sent by the emperors to bring a message from them to Octavius, and so humour these folks with friendly words." This plan pleased everybody. Maximianus took with him 12 of his leaders, white-haired men who were wiser than the others. As he went forward to meet Conanus, they held olive branches in their right hands. When the Britons saw these men of venerable years, who bore the olive as a sign of peace, they stood up respectfully to meet them, and made way, so that the envoys could approach the British general more freely. Soon the visitor stood in the presence of Conanus Marius. They saluted him in the name of the emperors and the Senate explain the whole circumstance, point by point. Then Carausius, Duke of Cornwall, ordered the bystanders to withdraw, taking his son Marius on one side with him. He addressed the king as follows: "See how God has brought about, in the way which suits you, the very thing which has long been wanted by those who have managed to keep, by their true affection for you, the trust you placed in them. You ordered your leaders to advise you what you should do about your daughter and your kingdom. Now that your senile condition makes it difficult for you to go on ruling your people any longer, some recommended that you should hand over the crown to your nephew, Conanus, and marry your daughter off in a seemly way in some other land. These were they who would have faced the ruin of their countrymen. If a prince speaking some foreign tongue were set in authority over them, others would have offered the realm to your daughter and to some nobleman of our own speech who could have succeeded you after your death. The majority, however, advised that someone of the race of the emperors should be sent for, someone to whom your daughter could be given, and the crown with her. These men assured you that a firm and abiding peace would then follow, for the might of Rome would protect them. God has now deigned to bring to your shores this young man, born, it is true, from Roman stock, yet sprung too from the blood royal of the Britons. If you take my advice, you will not hesitate to marry your daughter to him. Suppose you were to deny him this, what legal argument could you bring against him in the realm of Britain? He is of the blood of Constantine. He is a nephew of our own King Coel, whose daughter Helena possessed this kingdom by hereditary right, as none can deny." When Carausius had made his points, Octavius agreed with him. With the consent of all, he gave the kingship of Britain to Maximianus and his own daughter with it. When Conanus Marius saw this, he was more angry than you would have thought possible. He went off to Albany and busied himself in raising an army so that he could molest Maximianus. Once he had collected a force together, he crossed the Humber and ravaged the lands on both sides of the river. As soon as this was announced to Maximianus, he assembled his entire force and hurried to meet Conanus. He fought with him and left the field victorious. However, Conanus was not so reduced that he could not begin destroying the countryside once more as soon as he had reorganized his troops. Maximianus returned to the fray. They fought again, and the king withdrew only after he had been beaten. Finally, when each had done the other as much harm as he knew how, they made peace with each other, with the blessing of their friends. 5 years passed. Maximianus developed an obsession with power because of the enormous amount of gold and silver that flowed in it to him daily. He prepared a fleet, conscripted every armed soldier in Britain. The kingship of Britain was not enough for him. He wanted to subjugate the Gauls too. He crossed the Channel and went first to the kingdom of the Marries, which is now called Brittany. He began to attack the Frankish race which lived yourself. Whatever you have lost in